In this downturn in commodity prices and lack of foreign demand, where are the domestic markets that are still growing? Well, some farmers are tapping into the opportunity of consumers wanting more organic or regenerative products.
Organic continues to be the fastest segment of food sales. We see continued consumer interest. We see continued farmer interest in terms of capturing additional markets and the premiums that come with organic. But along with that, we see continued interest in regenerative agriculture.
Dr. Erin Silva knows that accessing these markets isn't always easy. There's a ton of risk associated with attempting to transition a farm to organic and/or regenerative practices.
Research has shown it takes 5 to 10 years for that system to re-equilibrate. So I think being able to best guide farmers through the transition really is the challenge.
And is it even feasible to develop a system that is both organic and regenerative? Dr. Silva is working with farmers of all sizes who are advancing their biological understanding to do just that.
So the plant is effectively feeding the soil biology. 1/3 of the carbohydrates that are produced, that's a phenomenal amount of energy that's going back into the soil.
Dr. Erin Silva returns for today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and if you're interested in where innovative ideas meet practical realities in food production, I think you found the right show. Dr. Erin Silva is back on today's episode. Erin first joined me on the podcast about 4 years ago now, in October of 2021, for an episode called Organic Farming Myths and Realities. That has been a very widely shared and popular episode of the show, and I wanted to invite her back to hear more about her work with farmers in Wisconsin that are going down the path of organic and regenerative farming. Now, on the surface, these two farming approaches are pretty easy to get behind. Let's try to reduce our dependence on synthetic chemistry, and let's try to build soil health over time while still farming intensively and profitably. But in practice, there are, of course, trade-offs. For example, to promote more living roots in the soil through things like cover crops, farmers need some way to terminate those cover crops, and using herbicides for something like that is really, really helpful. So I'm intrigued about how farmers are making these systems work together and how scientists like Dr. Erin Silva are doing the critical research and data collection to understand how these practices might work across more acres and with more farmers. So that's what today's episode is all about. For context here, I'll give you a little bit of a brief bio on our guest. Dr. Erin Silva is an associate professor and state extension specialist in organic and sustainable cropping systems in the Department of Plant Pathology, as well as the director of the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research influences the strong organic sector that contributes to Wisconsin's agricultural economy, with Wisconsin second only to California as the state with the greatest number of organic farms. In continued support of these farms and the organic sector within the state, nation, and globally, her research and scholarly contributions continue to be directed in the broad area of biology and agroecology of organic crop management, with emphasis on cover crops, soil health, and genotype environment interactions. Dr. Silva earned her Ph.D. in horticulture from Washington State University. I'm going to drop into the conversation here where Erin is talking about the diversity of organic farmers she's working with. Some are large conventional farmers that want to have some exposure to the organic market, while the rest run the gamut in terms of size and cropping system and market focus.
Increasingly, farmers are seeing organic as a marketing opportunity and a way to diversify their operations and buffer against volatile crop prices. So many of the farms that I work with aren't necessarily managing all their acres organically. They're looking at it as a way to diversify their operations and still run much of their acres conventionally, but choose specific acres to manage organically and capture that market opportunity and really do the best stewardship for all their land, using the land most appropriate for organic agriculture, to be able to capture that market, but still using the tools available for conventional agriculture to do the best stewardship of acres that require that type of management. Anywhere from smaller farms managing 10 to 50 acres of organic grains to farms running over 10,000 acres, which again may be more of what we call a parallel operation, operating some of those acres in conventional and some of those acres under organic. So incredibly diverse in terms of the sorts of farmers engaging in organic and also where those farmers are located.
Yeah. I would imagine a lot of these organic practices are more holistic or kind of systems based. Does that make it hard from a research side instead of saying like we applied X and then in our control we didn't apply it? Is it a little more complicated from a research standpoint?
It definitely is. It definitely is. And I know that farmers, especially those that are in the area of regenerative agriculture, often criticize that the universities are behind practitioner knowledge and expertise. And some of that is because it is very difficult to be able to capture the impacts of these practices. Often because they are so biologically based across a wide range of ecosystems and environments. A lot of what we see with the impacts of these practices are impacts on soil biology and the broader ecosystem. So, in trying to capture the results of those change in practice over multiple soil environments that have different sorts of soil textures and chemistry, rainfall, weather, and how that impacts soil biology, it can be incredibly complex.
Right. And as far as research goes, what's kind of taking up most of your time and attention right now? What are you focused on in this kind of journey towards organic no-till?
A lot of our work focuses on diversification and cover crops as a tool for that diversification. So, a lot of what we do is grounded in the soil health principles, looking at how do we integrate practices in a way that reduces risk for farmers, is workable for farmers, but allows farmers to capture those benefits of having living roots in the soil, having diversification across their crop rotation, making sure the ground is covered, ideally integrating livestock within the systems. And how do we use these different practices to allow for livestock integration onto the land or the production of forage? So much of what our research focuses on is looking at how do we create a suite of practices that allow for farmers to be able to move along their soil health journey, again, in a way that's workable and is finding workable solutions for farmers.
Yeah, and I know a lot of farmers that utilize cover crops, as a tool, are able to sort of like, for lack of a better term, kind of like turn them on and turn them off using herbicides. And my understanding is there aren't a lot of organic options when it comes to herbicides. So if they're wanting to use cover crops and remain organic, how are they managing that?
Yeah, now that's a good question, and certainly is one of the challenges that we're looking to balance through our research with understanding how choice of cover crops and cash crops relates to planting dates and termination dates, and how that then impacts weed management and other aspects of nutrient management within the system. So, with organic management, a lot of what we do is focused on using steel. So, using equipment to be able to terminate those cover crops, or at least suppress those cover crops in a way that we're limiting competition. A lot of what we need to manage when we're looking at co-planting cover crops with cash crops is trying to provide an environment for the cash crops to thrive and be able to get the water and the nutrients they need to be able to reach the yield potential of those crops. So in organic agriculture, instead of using herbicides as a tool for suppression, we're either using tools such as roller crimpers or mowers, or even at times incorporating those cover crops as green manures into the soil and limiting competition through ways that are mechanically based instead of herbicide based, which still requires a lot of technology and a lot of innovation. And it's been really exciting to see equipment companies step up to the plate and offer some options that are innovative and progressive.
Hmm. Your comment with the equipment, you said it's been really exciting to see equipment providers sort of come out with new technology to help with this. Can you give us some examples of those?
Yeah, so we've been working with companies to develop different ways of terminating the cover crops, again, mechanically at a very certain specific stage of crop maturity. So with annual crops, if we go into the field and use, again, either roller crimpers or mowers or other sorts of equipment to be able to either, chop or disrupt the growth of the cover crop essentially terminates as a herbicide would be applied. So it does move that crop into a stage where it no longer looks to set seed, it no longer looks to grow, and will create a killed mulch on the soil surface, again, mimicking what you would see if a herbicide would be applied. But to be able to effectively terminate those cover crops mechanically, it does require innovation and technology in terms of equipment development. So there has been companies that have, again, looked to see where they can contribute to these systems in these markets, different models of roller crimpers that can cover larger acres, that more effectively terminate crops, again, to create a complete kill that would mimic a herbicide application, and ways to manage so that we are able to plant the crop through these thick mulches, allowing for good soil to seed contact, and allow for a very robust stand that will allow us to reach the yield potentials that we're looking at achieving on crop acres.
Well, I mean, it's encouraging to hear that some companies are attacking this, because it does seem to me to be a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, where for the equipment provider, there may not be a market there yet, but the market sort of needs the equipment to to be there. You sort of need the equipment for the growth in acres of this type of farming, but without that market, it might be difficult for some equipment providers to justify it. But it sounds like you are seeing some kind of continue to innovate in this area.
Exactly. I think with the continued growth of organic, I was just at a meeting earlier this week that again reported numbers that organic continues to be the fastest segment of our food sales. So we see continued consumer interest. We see continued farmer interest in terms of, again, capturing additional markets and the premiums that come with organic. But along with that, we see continued interest in regenerative agriculture, not only from farmers looking to steward their lands and pass on healthy fields to the next generation and offering that as an opportunity to keep the farm in the family and provide a living for the next generation. But also, again, the market opportunity, young people moving up into their own independence, millennials and Gen Z moving out and starting their families. There is more and more interest from consumers in terms of where their food is coming from and wanting more transparency and clean labels and understand how their food is grown. And regenerative agriculture is emerging as a way for consumers to connect with food and understand the practices that are being used to grow that food and that connection with a cleaner way to grow food that regenerates the soil and the environment. So there's more farmers and markets that are being offered with regenerative agriculture that, again, kind of opens up these doors for these new technologies that also benefit organic agriculture.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if you get past the terms of organic and regenerative and whatever kind of loaded preconceptions you have about those terms, directionally, I don't think anyone can argue that they aren't good directions to go. Reducing our dependence on synthetics on the organic side and regenerating the soil, leaving the soil healthier than when we found it every time we grow crops. Those are good directions to go. But I know obviously there is a big challenge in making it work logistically. What are you finding when people kind of concede that, yeah, I'd love to go that direction, but what are you hearing most from farmers to finish that sentence?
I think the biggest challenge that I've heard from farmers is looking at how to navigate the transition to these new practices. And that definitely is the case within organic, but I think could also be extended into regenerative agriculture as well. We do have incredible examples of farmers that are, again, integrating these practices of cover crops, diversity, integration of livestock into their systems, and realizing the benefits that are going to help with the farm as a business, as well as looking at the long-term health of our soils. So being able to reduce inputs, be able to buffer from volatile crop prices as well as volatile input prices, being able to diversify their markets and be able to capture additional value and have additional revenue streams on their farms. But that takes time. It takes time for farmers to be able to engage in those new enterprises, perhaps gain the expertise to be able to grow different crops, and able to have their farm be able to respond to those practices. As I mentioned, really the core of organic and regenerative, both of those, the core is the soil. And a lot of what drives the soil system within these agricultural approaches is biology. And whereas we can see very quick responses in soil biology in some cases, it does take some time for the land to transition. And we've seen this too with conventional no-till. That research has shown it takes 5 to 10 years for that system to re-equilibrate and for farmers to really be able to balance the transition to these new practices with the stability of crop yields. So I think being able to best guide farmers through the transition, whether it be organic or regenerative, it really is the challenge. And some of that is research, and some of that might be other supports that are needed for the economic aspect of that transition.
Well, to stick with it through that transition for that amount of time, it takes some real conviction. Obviously, you're a scientist. I'm wondering what you have seen, if there's anything specific that you can share of when you really became a believer that, hey, this is possible and this is worth kind of committing to.
From working with farmers directly, it's been truly inspiring to hear and see from the on-farm research we've done the soil health benefits that are achieved from the adoption of these practices. And again, it may take several years to be able to see the full benefits, but to be able to go on to the farms and see the data that farmers have collected themselves through soil tests, as well as the data that we've collected in farms that have been long-term adopters of these different systems, and hear their stories about how that has helped them in terms of being able to be better managers and being able to reduce their inputs. The data shows that indeed, integration of diversity and integration of cover crops, we do see better soil structure, we see better bulk density, we see better nutrient cycling. And to hear the farmer stories about how that has actually impacted their farms really drives me to continue to look at how can we, through our research, be able to help guide farmers through this transition and allow them to successfully adopt these practices without compromising the production and economics of their farm.
Yeah. How are we doing to that end? Meaning, are we helping farmers, if it takes 5 to 10 years to really appreciate the value of the system, what are we doing for farmers in those 5 to 10 years to support them? And where are there still areas that we need to offer more support?
I think that we have increasingly a really strong data set to help guide through the adoption of different cover crops and where we might see risks in terms of nutrient availability to the crop, where there might be risk in terms of water availability. So some of the, I would say, low-hanging fruit in terms of regenerative practices: planting a cover crop after corn or soybean harvest, keeping the ground covered throughout the winter, keeping living roots in the soil. We have a good data to show best practices and how that could be done, either through aerial seeding, through drones, or drilling those cover crops after harvest, and then when to terminate under different environments, and what is the best way to alter any sort of nutrient management approaches that you might have to account for those cover crops. So there are some, I think, again, some more basic ways that farmers can introduce these practices onto their farms without having to do a wide-scale system change. Where I think there is still room for further development is from the market side of things, to be quite honest, because to be able to intensify these systems to the full degree, including adding more livestock into the system and having beef as an enterprise or other small ruminants as an enterprise, it does require the access to more specialized markets, as well as be able to ensure that farmers are getting the price they need to cover their cost of production. So looking at where we can create more domestic production and purchasing of cereal grains, whether it be oats or wheat or barley, and how can we increase our processing capacity for meats. I think that's where we're really going to see further adoption of these practices when we have the markets and the prices to help support farmers in integrating that diversity into their farm enterprises.
Right. Yeah, right. It gets again back to like a systems based approach. We need a whole system to develop up around this instead of just like, a magic wand.
Exactly, exactly. And having buyers of raw product see the value of domestic production and the amazing work our American farmers do to produce crops and produce them safely and be good stewards and prioritize domestic purchasing and have that infrastructure available for milling and for bringing that raw product as an ingredient, whether it be for food grade products and processed products or if for livestock feed. I think that's critical is looking at supporting those diverse markets.
One thing I'm curious about, there's a kind of a narrative in my head, but I don't know if it's actually really playing out in real life, which is, with the current farm economy and the commodity markets being what they are, is this driving farmers to look for other approaches like this? Have you noticed any different level of interest as a result of, tough times in the commodity markets currently?
We have seen through our events farmers that are again interested in exploring organic and maybe not on their whole farm, but as a way for diversification, and as a way to again buffer from volatile prices and volatile input prices. So we are seeing that the current state of the farm economy is motivating people to have a second look at what other options might be. But again, from the regenerative side of things, I think that a motivator is looking at how can we reduce inputs and how can we also buffer against extreme weather. We had an extremely wet season here in Wisconsin, and some of these practices allow for farmers to be able to have expanded windows to get out in the field, can buffer against extreme rainfall events, dry out the fields earlier, and allow for field operations to occur in windows that otherwise might not be available. So the fact that we can buffer against both heavy rainfall and droughts with the integration of regenerative practices and help allow for wider windows of field operations has been a motivator as well.
Right. And I'm sure, in some cases, a farmer may be looking to solve a problem they have on the farm. Maybe it's resistance, or maybe, I've been talking to some pulse growers because I do a pulse crop podcast, and they're talking about, certain countries wanting glyphosate-free products. And so, are you getting some of that as well? It's like, look, I don't have this tool anymore, and I don't know what to do. Is there an organic approach that I could take instead? Are you seeing more of that?
Absolutely. No, a lot of the interest from the non-organic sector and the research that we do of using cover crops as a weed management tool is driven by the increase in herbicide-resistant weeds and the lack of new chemistries coming onto the market. So again, not necessarily looking at becoming organic or transitioning to organic, but what other tools are there available to help manage these challenges more holistically? So the work that we've done with using high biomass cover crops, and even some of the work that we're doing with using mowing as a tool to manage between row weeds has been increasingly of interest to farmers more broadly, looking at alternative solutions as we are challenged with the issues with herbicide chemistries, both existing chemistries and lack of new technologies coming down the pipeline.
And generally speaking, is your research focused on kind of farming practices, or are you doing things like testing biologicals and things like that?
It's more at this point focused on the farming practices. So how do we manage cover crops in a way that, again, allows for the results that we want to see in terms of weed suppression, which is by default, to some extent, a competition effect between cover crops and weeds, but not having that competition affect our cash crops. So more looking at agronomic questions in terms of types of crops and cover crops that would synergize together and work well together, and planting dates and seeding rates and timing of management. But biologicals are another open area that farmers have seen benefit but there's not necessarily clarity in terms of the degree and magnitude of benefit and where they might be beneficial. And again, just like I mentioned, the challenge with doing research with respect to soil biology is the fact that biological systems inherently are impacted by so many aspects of the natural environment, whether it be soil moisture or temperature or timing, carbon within the soil system. The same is true with biologicals, that there can be very real benefits of biologicals, but we still need more clarity in terms of when they work, the magnitude of impact a farmer can expect to see. What does that mean in terms of return on investment and economics? And that's challenging when we're trying to do research in a single environment, but instead, I think takes more coordinated effort, including working with farmers to trial these over multiple environments in multiple years so that we're better able to capture a larger data set to understand more of when these products can have more of a profound impact.
And is that the primary way you account for sort of like these systems-based research into kind of systems-based solutions, just like more data, more iterations, more trials, more replications, and the bigger the data set, the more kind of reliable it can be? Or are there other ways that the science is starting to think more holistically about these things?
I think working with farmers and as research partners is essential as we try to move these new practices forward. Farmers are incredible innovators. They know their farms best. They know how to integrate that technology and what is realistic, and how that be able to observe and be able to reflect upon not only what they're seeing that current year, but how does that relate to what they've seen in previous years. And more, the model is to look at utilizing on-farm research and the partnership of farmers to understand how these technologies and how these practices translate onto farms and how that affects the ways that farmers need to alter their systems and the effects on, again, their farm as a business. So increasingly, we do see more of these on-farm research networks and the recognition of the value of using real farms as research sites and moving off of the university research stations.
Well, at some point you had posted a slide about kind of your theory of change. And this isn't meant to quiz you on the slide because there was a lot going on there.
I'm not sure if I remember.
But the question you kind of posed, I thought was a good one, which is, what roles can land grant universities play in supporting the organic movement and our new and existing organic farmers? And I think you sort of had like a whole sort of theory of change and a journey that kind of went through that. I don't know if you could summarize that for me. Again, I'm not trying to quiz you, put you on the spot here, but if you could kind of summarize how you approach that.
Yeah, no, we were, there's a lot of different players within agriculture and supporting farmers, including nonprofits, including industry. So really looking at specifically as someone working in extension, as a researcher in a land grant university, what unique role can we play in supporting farmers in their success, especially again, as we look moving forward and see some of the challenges with markets, with trade, with global economies, with changing weather patterns. So specifically, I think what we can provide at a land grant university is this way to move forward with objective research. So not to at all diminish the research that's done by other entities, but we're able to do more work where we might be comparing products side by side. We have the resources of different expertise and the faculty here at the university, and our ability to take risks in ways that farmers might not be able to take, and try things that are really pushing the envelope and thinking outside the box. So our responsibility to be able to respond to farmers, be able to listen to farmers, understand their primary research questions and where they're seeing challenges, and utilize the resources that we have, again, particularly with respect to objective data, and be able to take data off of a wide variety of locations and environments, I think is really key.
And what are the next questions you're asking yourself, or that are guiding your research going forward? What are the kind of the loose ends that still need to be pursued to take this all to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the things that we're pursuing, the research questions that we're pursuing, and we've already touched upon, and one of them is biological inputs and trying to overlay the application of biologicals with some of the more practice-based solutions that we've been already focusing on. Again, the question with biologicals is in part understanding how they are acting in diverse environments. As we mentioned, some of the motivation of transitioning to regenerative practices is lowering inputs. So a lot of what we've been focusing on with our research has not been input based, but really been practice based to continue to look at ways to lower the dependence on outside inputs and create more of a closed system. Whereas biologicals, they certainly have other benefits as compared to chemical-based solutions. They're still an input, and they still have a cost associated with them. So we haven't focused on that quite so much. But again, we've heard from farmers they have seen benefits under certain situations and really want to dive deeper into that. For instance, do foliar feeds. Can you expect a better payoff under certain weather conditions? One of the things that we've been hearing about foliar feeds from multiple farmers is that they do see a benefit under dry conditions, but not under normal precipitation years. So be able to better document that with research. Is that something that is being seen on an individual farm, or is that a larger pattern? And then can that help guide and create models for decisions in terms of when you might want to utilize some of these different technologies? So better being able to define how to use different biologicals, where they're most effective, and again, how does that affect the ROI is something that we are looking to pursue. Another area of research that we are hoping to better engage in is the integration of livestock. So looking at we know through the soil health principles that integrating livestock can benefit our soil quality and our soil health, but obviously there's a lot of challenges there in terms of grain farms being able to take that on as a farming enterprise, the commitment, the expertise. So researching different models and different levels of commitment, so to speak, that would allow farmers to be able to derive the benefits of integration of livestock in a way that's workable for them in terms of their farm labor and in terms of the resources they have on their farm. So are there ways to be able to bring in livestock as a custom grazing operation? Are there ways to be able to bring in manure resources from other farms where you might be also then growing some forage as cover crops and doing some double cropping or intercropping and be able to derive some benefit that way so that you're not having to manage that livestock on farm, but still having that sort of partnership to get some of those benefits. And then are there technologies that can help? I think technology plays a big role in these systems, whether it be organic and regenerative. And are there ways through virtual fencing? Are there ways through different watering systems that we can decrease the labor and decrease the amount of capital that might be needed for farmers to be able to integrate some of these systems into their cropping system approaches, but have the benefit of livestock without necessarily that insurmountable hurdle of expertise and labor and cost when thinking about doing that.
Well, earlier you referenced the fact that there's some critique of university researchers that they're behind what's happening in the farm. But then you also just gave the example of like farmers that were observing differences in foliars from dry years to wet years. And so, hey, we need to get some data behind that. That actually sounds like a good, healthy way to do research, right? So farmers noticing something, so let's research it and see, what the data says. I guess I don't fully understand why it's a critique to say that the university is behind what's happening in the farm, because it doesn't seem like a bad system to me to want to put data behind something that's already happening on the farm.
Yeah, and I think you could look at it both ways. I think that farmers are hungry for more information to be able to have data to drive management decisions without having to kind of make that first leap in terms of choosing a product or evaluating when making the decision to integrate a new practice, is that going to pay off? And oftentimes, farmers are trying these practices on a smaller scale to be able to do some of that evaluation on their own. But we really, and that's part of the benefit of also having the extension component of my position, to be able to work together, to be able to identify where there are key issues or new technologies that farmers are interested in, to be able to create that sort of partnership where, again, the university is seeking out resources to do the research and take on that risk, and be able to have the time to be able to collect that data in a rigorous way. If, again, farmers are amazing innovators, amazing problem solvers, but they're trying to do a lot of things. So to have the burden of doing that evaluation on their own is just another thing on their list of activities to have to get through in a day, and it can be challenging. But to having that relationship where we are responding to farmer observation, I think is really beneficial to ensure that what we're doing aligns with farmer priorities, needs, and what they're seeing on their farms.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me, at least. Well, I know, a lot of times genetics can help make a practice more effective. Like, think about like Roundup Ready and what that did for Roundup. Roundup was a whole lot, it was a lot more attractive when you had Roundup Ready. And I know organic, you're not going to have a GMO, at least not with the current organic standards. But are there genetics that can help make these organic and regenerative practices more effective because the genetics are kind of uniquely suited to that way of farming? Or is that kind of something we just hope to have in the future?
That's something, again, that we're hoping to be able to evaluate more rigorously and are actively seeking out further research projects to define. And, we've bred crop genetics for certain environments, and have done an amazing job being successful in breeding for those environments. I mean, our corn and soybean yields are higher than they've ever been, and some of that's due to better practices, but a lot of that's due to better crop genetics. But we also know that breeding for certain systems may cause lack of adaptation to other systems. And some of the research that we've conducted has looked at older varieties and specifically looked at some of the interactions of these older crop varieties with soil biology. Again, soil biology really being a driver of both organic and regenerative, and what's differentiating those systems from conventional systems, and how that compares with modern hybrids, which have incredible yield potential. I mean, there's no doubt that our modern hybrids that have been bred for conventional systems are incredibly productive, but it has that productivity and have those increases in yields, that at the expense of some of the traits that these older crop varieties have had. And from what we've seen, that is indeed the case, that some of the older varieties, they may not have the yield potential of our modern hybrids, but they do respond to the soil system differently, particularly the soil biology. And that does cause differences within the potential for resilience under different situations. So, for example, when we're looking at mycorrhizal fungi associations, mycorrhizal fungi being a part of our soil biology, which a specific sort of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi forms association with plant roots, where the fungi benefit because they're able to get the sugars that come from photosynthesis from the crop, but they confer benefits to the crop in terms of being extensions to the root system, which allow for better acquisition of certain nutrients as well as better acquisition of water. So in situations potentially where those crops have been bred with ready access to water and nutrients, they may not form those associations more frequently or regularly because there is a cost to the crop plant in terms of carbon that could otherwise contribute to yield. And one of the facts that I had heard, which really, I think, shifted my viewpoint in terms of the interconnectedness of this relationship between the plant and the soil biology, was the figure that 30% of the energy that the crop produces through photosynthesis, the energy being the sugars and the carbohydrates, actually gets pumped back into the soil system. So the plant is effectively feeding the soil biology. 1/3 of the carbohydrates that are produced, that's a phenomenal amount of energy that's going back into the soil. So you can imagine from an evolutionary standpoint how important that robust, strong soil biology is in terms of the crop. It's in its acquisition to nutrients, its ability to upregulate essentially its immune system and be more resistant to diseases and insects. And if the crop has lost that ability, again, through breeding within systems where they don't necessarily need to that same degree, those sorts of associations due to the application of synthetic nutrients, synthetic fertilizers, or not having to have that same immune system because of disease management with fungicides. They don't need to have that cost expended to soil biology. But when we're looking at regenerative systems where it's so driven by soil biology, whether it be the nutrient cycling or again, the lowering of inputs, to have those sorts of associations is really critical. So going back to those older varieties and understanding how they facilitated these soil environments, how they facilitated these symbiotic relationships, including with arbusculum mycorrhizal fungi, and how do we bring those into more of these modern hybrids, not use that yield potential, but get those benefits that then confer stability across different environments and different stresses. I think that's a real target for future breeding that would specifically benefit organic and regenerative systems. Again, so reliant on soil biology and bringing back some of those traits that really were able to utilize that soil biology in positive ways.
Well, I have a feeling you've already kind of answered this, but maybe we'll just address it directly. If a farmer's listening and they say, yeah, I would love to move in more of an organic and regenerative direction, but I'm still really skeptical that it's possible in my area on my farm. Do you have kind of first steps that you usually recommend to someone in that area? Or, I mean, I'm sure it's very dependent on their individual situation, but just in general, where should they start?
Yeah, definitely knowledge is key. So understanding where the resources are in your state or region. There's amazing conferences that are often held by universities and university extension, but also nonprofits that are focused on whether it be organic or soil health. So going to those events, a lot of those events, you hear from farmers directly in terms of their experiences and how they've made the transition successful on their farms. So going to those events, learning from other practitioners, others that are doing research, and then ideally finding mentors, building a community. And some of those mentorships are probably more face-to-face, but there's also more and more groups, and farmers are finding more and more support through virtual networks, different social platforms. So finding, and oftentimes those are promoted at these various conferences, but building a community where that knowledge can be shared and questions can be answered. I'm part of a Facebook group called Modern Organic Row Crop Farmers, and it's been amazing to see the information exchange and the openness of farmers to respond to questions and share information, anywhere from experiences in nutrient and fertility inputs to crops and markets. And just that openness in terms of sharing successes and providing information. So building community, getting information, and taking it slow. It does take time. These are both knowledge intensive systems, and taking the time to build that knowledge and not thinking about transitioning all acres, but starting small, I think is key too, to be able to build up that expertise and to be sure that you're building on successes and not building on risk or failure.
All right, well, that is where we will wrap up today's episode. Thank you again to Dr. Erin Silva for coming back onto the show after 4 years here, and for another great interview, great episode. Really appreciate that. I'll leave a link in the show notes where you can go listen to her first appearance, episode 280, if you'd like. Also, I'll link to her research page at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Certainly some worthwhile research there to figure out how farmers can make these systems work, and I think for the benefit of all of us in the future of agriculture. Thanks again to Erin. Last but never least, thank you for your time and your attention. I don't take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.